we're starting with the aviation story, talking about the MOU signed between the Nigerian government and Kuwait regarding the aviation sector. You know, yesterday was International Civil Aviation Day, and the minister took advantage of that, ceremony to sign an MOU with Kuwait government. Now, the essence of the MOU is to look at what the two countries could, how they can add value to each other when it comes to boosting the aviation sector. They call it bilateral air service agreement. It's a kind of agreement whereby both countries can, have exchange of services when it comes to air transport. So what it means is the local airlines here can do businesses in Kuwait, and to sign this MOU, it took a special day like the International Civil Aviation Day. Let me start with Dr. Idahosa. This kind of collaboration or this kind of partnership, of what civic significance is it going to be to the aviation sector? You know, the minister has been in the news in recent times, and you know that all eyes on him. He's doing everything to ensure that he's going to right the wrong. So let me start with you. This MOU between Nigeria and Kuwait, how significant is it going to be to the aviation sector?
Well, I think for me, anywhere you can get value is worth the while, as far as I'm concerned. The aviation industry is one industry that is quite lucrative. Only unfortunate that we have not been able to leverage that industry so well. I'm not sure whether the Kuwait airline comes to Nigeria regularly, direct flight from Nigeria to Kuwait, because there's no place on the planet Earth where you will not find Nigeria do business. And so having a straight flight from Nigeria to Kuwait would be quite ideal. And I think it's also important too to see how we also can leverage this opportunity, thanks to the failed attempt at the Nigerian Air, because that what will make the agreement real worth the while. That if it's a bilateral agreement, it means that you're allowing me to land, and I'm also allowing you to land. And then, of course, we can actually exchange value. And I think that's where Nigeria needs really to work hard and see how some of our own local or domestic airlines take advantage of this agreement. Airplanes can be moving to Kuwait, and also Kuwait airline come to Nigeria. And I think if it is done, value is added. I know, of course, employment is created, more revenue for government, as it were. So these are all things that government really need to do, because the emphasis should really not be, for me, on the first market. Secondary markets are things that we can actually leverage, because if you say you want to access the American market, or you want to access the Singaporean market, all these things can be real, not as easy as it seems. But see, if you're moving into markets that are not too developed, you can quickly leverage, and therefore the first market will become envious of your success and want to do business with you. So I think for me it's a nice move, although Nigerian-Kuwaiti relationship has been cordial over the years. This is just to strengthen that bond between Nigeria and Kuwait, and I hope that our own people will take advantage of this opportunity to do business globally.
It's a boost for the aviation sector, expanding beyond just domestic flights, because that's what the Nigerian airlines basically do. So, but going to having this kind of agreement, it solidifies the aviation industry. And with this, I know that more will be easier to come, and then it will expand the markets for the airlines, which will be very good for them. So imagine if you're now taking people to Kuwait, there's a direct flight from Nigeria to Kuwait, and you don't have to do all those transits. It's better off, and it's more activity for the aviation industry.
No doubt, this kind of partnership will always lead to more trades, more businesses, and what it means is you're exchanging value as well. But let's look at the also
another aspect. Sorry, Femi, to cut you in, that we must also have to look at. Is one thing to sign agreement. It's also another thing to create the enabling environment to do business. As it is now, the Abuja airport, for example, only one runway servicing both the international flight and the domestic flight. And that's not good enough. That's certainly not good enough. So we must have the airport that will be able to actually service this operation. If you go to UAE, for example, they can handle over 9 flights at the same time, coming and going at the same time, and without any serious trouble on one airport. And I think those are the things that, of course, we also need to invest in infrastructure. So that, of course, because that's where the value comes from, because we're talking about tourism. That people can come in and they move out at any time. So this is why you see sometimes you are having delayed flight. I remember sometime early this year I was coming from Abuja and we have to cancel a flight because one airline grounded on the runway, and those who were going to travel to catch a flight in Lagos couldn't move. Those who were doing domestic, they couldn't move because just the runway, just single runway was blocked. And I think government need to really expedite action in opening up this runway so that you can have multiple airline come to your country, and of course handling will not become a very significant issue. I think I need just to add that to this signing of the agreement. So it's one thing to sign agreement, it's also to make the agreement profitable.
I wish the other international airports that we have can receive traffic, but there's a preference for Abuja and Lagos. But I do hope that maybe Port Harcourt, Asaba, and some other international airports will get they have the structure, but maybe just a bit of improvement, and the passengers too will be willing to use those routes to connect.
But I also think if Lagos and Abuja is done really well, because globally I think that's what you see. If you go to, for example, Paris, Charles de Gaulle has a very fundamental airport where sufficient structure, so people can do transit. Yes, there are some few couples of other airports that may not be as big as Charles de Gaulle. So you go to Heathrow, you go to UK. So all these things are people really domicile. If you go to the UAE, you have the Dubai International Airport. That's the major airport that really fits UAE. Yes, there's an airport in Sharjah, there's airport in Abu Dhabi, but they are not as big as the one in this thing. So if you have one who is functional, so when people come in, they can actually take local flights to other parts of the country, is fine. We don't really need to invest in several international airports, because when people are coming to you, except there are value really that you have, maybe you have Enugu International Airport, and so who's going to fly into Enugu International Airport, except that there's a business you want to do in Enugu. But people want to come to visit Nigeria, they want to visit Abuja, they want to visit Lagos, and we know the reason, because Abuja is the seat of power, Lagos is the seat of the economy. So until we grow those economy really, those international airports, there'll be not too much of traffic. Investment in them actually may be like actually putting money where you don't need it. But I think the major gateway to Nigeria, which is Lagos and Abuja, we must find a way to develop it so that the traffic that is required can actually flow. We don't need to have too many of them, but if you have one that is standard, you can actually
have two in Abuja.
Yeah, of course. Why not? If there is no space to actually expand this older one, we can look for other places where we can actually create bigger airports where we can put all resources, and people coming to Abuja can take advantage of those facilities.
How will you assess the the level of the reaction by the minister to the issue of Nigeria, here, talking about the national carrier? What are the lessons for Nigeria? The new minister decided to investigate, and one of the things in your arrival was the fact that part of the agreement was that an Ethiopian would be the one to head that, airline, which he said Nigerians who were part of the deal signed to that. I was surprised that they had to sign that kind of deal, that you have a foreigner to have to head a national carrier, when you have qualified Nigerians who could do that. So what are the lessons? Looking at how the ministers have handled this issue of national carrier, there are some who still argue it's still the way to go.
One of the book I enjoyed reading while I was doing my leadership training was Buy Your Future by Mesa Otabi, which used the story of Esau and Jacob to describe the kind of nations you find on the planet Earth and the kind of people. Because if you look at that story, say there are two kinds of people and there are two kinds of nations that was in the womb of Rebekah. Now, these two nations are distinguished by the way they do things. Now, what Mesa Otabi found out in that book is that most of the third world nation, they are controlled by the Esau paradigm, that it is the Esau mentality that drives them, because they're always negotiating out of empty stomach. And every time you negotiate out of empty stomach, you really don't get good value for it. And I think this is what it is.
So, of course.
Yes, of course, because you are hungry, and you can hear Esau say to Jacob, if you don't give me this red meal, I will die. And so they say, okay, well, I will give you meal, but just give me your birthright, and that's fine. And it was easy for him to part with the birthright because he was negotiating from empty stomach. And in that book, Mesa Otabi says most African leaders negotiate out of empty stomach, and therefore they sign anything because they are in a hurry to prove to the citizen that they are doing stuff. And I think this is not good for us. We really need people with a kind of Jacob mindset and to see where you can get value. If it is not possible now, we can do it tomorrow. We should not be desperate to just make a name. But you see, at the end of the day, look at the shame that came with it. We quickly branded the airplane, we brought it here, and Ethiopia took it back because they were the stronger partner in that negotiation. So I think this is the real issue that we need to confront, where ministers are in a hurry to prove themselves, and therefore they don't take time to look at documents or even agreement to see how it profits us as a people. So you are negotiating your future away. So this is what it is. And I think those who are employed as ministers or appointed as ministers to drive the process must have the nation at the back of their mind. But again, this is because, of course, people say there's no global vision as a nation that we're all pursuing, that every ministry should key into, so that we actually know where we want to make value. Because this is what is important. We cannot compete in all the fronts. We must choose our battles wisely as a nation. And then, of course, focus all our energy, all our resources in that one single direction. And then, as we begin to make value from that area, you cannot begin to diversify. And I don't think it's just necessary that, oh, every minister must do something and it must do it now. And therefore, we get into agreements that does not favor Nigeria. This is not just the very first type. We saw the P&ID agreement, and there are thousands of them like that, that even many of them are facing litigation as we speak. So these are the real issues that faces us, because one person is just wanting to prove a point, and that point itself may be quite unnecessary. And I don't think we needed to get into that area of signing an agreement that will not be to the advantage of your country. Like we were taught while we were in school, international relation is simply the extension of your domestic politics. So it is what is good for your citizen that should drive your interaction with other nations of the world.
Interesting. Now let's get to Edo State, where the state government, in partnership with the federal government, has decided to empower 500 entrepreneurs, including women and youth, with what we call agri-capital. There's been this advocacy for young people to go into agriculture, for them to see what they can do out of it. Now the Edo State government has taken this initiative now to see what can be done by providing capital. When it comes to starting any business, the greatest headache has to be the issue of financing and the issue of capital. So the Edo State government has taken this initiative to ensure that these young men and women are being empowered, about 500 of them. Let me start with you, Dauza. The right step in the right direction?
Well, I don't have the details as we speak, so I would not be able to actually be authoritative in this regard. But my counsel will just be that we're also expecting that this particular initiative is strategic enough. I'm not an advocate of just giving people money without thinking it through. Because we have done this over and over, and it does not yield any substantial results. What I want to see, I want to see a situation, for example, you know, in the early 90s, in the 80s, in the early 2000s, Edo was the hub, for example, for pineapple production. And we're doing it en masse. Plantain, en masse. Now, I want to see a kind of cooperative in this direction, where we are going to select fruits to be produced, and the area where these fruits are going to come from. And these agripreneurs are grouped into clusters or cooperative, so that it becomes substantial. And then we are going to also see how we have to also invest in the processing of these agri products, such a way that the farmer who is actually benefiting is able to even pay back the facility and still live a good life. Because this is where the interest in agriculture had died. I usually use my example as a young man. I used to tap rubber. And those days, rubber business was good. Because even from primary school, not to secondary, primary school, we wake up very early in the morning, go and tap rubber, and then we come back from school, we go and collect the rubber. The lumps we gather on Sunday, the middlemen who buy come to the town and they weigh your lumps and they give you money, and then you're a big boy for that day. And we're not depending on our parents, but they planted the plantation, but we were actually bringing rubber. So rubber was coming out en masse up to a certain point where, of course, we tapped rubber and we saw that people who were paying us in advance before are now owing us 1 week, 2 weeks, 1 month. And then, of course, you ask why, and they tell you that, look, the rubber they took to Saple, that Ibo has not brought money. It only took me to grow up to realize what actually happened. That once they developed synthetic to the rubber, the importation dropped. So they were not buying. What happened to our parents? They cut down the rubbers to plant cassava. And this is what happened when you don't invest in the value chain of an agricultural product. Because people are putting effort into a farm and they cannot see real value for it. Sometimes the market is not ready. You plant plantain, you cut them down, there's no ready buyer who is quickly to convert it into finished products or processed plantain or flour, whatever it is. So if this is happening, the farmer becomes discouraged. Because the whole essence of a man going into the farm is to be able to make a living out of it. So these are issues that we must also have to address. There must also be a program, maybe for cold storage facilities, so that some of these perishables that we are getting from the farm, we don't just harvest them and then they waste out during their season. And then after season, it becomes quite expensive and we are not able to modulate the prices. So these are issues that I feel that those who are taking initiative must put to heart. Not just to take facility and give to party men for the sake of winning elections. And then, of course, at the end of the day, we don't get value for it. That loan is acquired and it is not repaid. Just my take, because I cannot, I don't think I have the details to that program. I will not be able to answer them.
The interesting thing about the program is they are not being given funds. So the way it's going to work is the fund is going to be committed in providing equipment, you know, fertilizer, some of the seedlings that will be needed for the farming. You know, that's why it's being called Agricare Working Capital. So this time around,
my challenge with that,
yeah,
who is the contractor buying the fertilizer? Will the farmer get it at the right price? Who is bringing the equipment? These are issues, and very weighty issue at that. Because if you give a farmer fertilizer and you monetized it, except you are not wanting him to pay back. So you should be able to calculate what is going to be produced in the farm, whether it should be able to repay the facility. So except that it's a grant. But if it's a loan, then of course you have to be careful how we get and source these materials.
In a system like this, what way would have been better to empower farmers?
Yeah, but
or empower those in the agriculture sector?
That is what I'm saying. We need, first and foremost, to be strategic about what we do. You see, today in Israel, there are technology they call precision agriculture, where people can sit down on the table and will be able to estimate the quantum of fruits they need from a tree and determine how to make it work. All these things are already available and alive and are here with us. So we don't need to reinvent the wheel. What I'm simply saying is that the state needs to be more strategic in this kind of partnership. To say, okay, this is what we want to do based on the land size that we have, based on the resources that's available to us. And therefore, we are going to empower such people with XY capital to produce this quantum of fruit. It becomes measurable at the end of the day. So it's not just to say, oh, we are giving seedling to people, we are giving fertilizer to people. Now, it's not just about fertilizer. I grew up to see extension worker, for example, come to our village to tell our parents how to use fertilizer and the type of fertilizer that the soil require, because they have to first of all do the soil tests. That is no longer in existence today, because what I see is that all one brand fertilizer is what you carry. Those extension workers those days will look at, do soil tests to know what is missing in your soil that you need to help the fruit to grow. We have left all these things where we started, which we the really solid foundation we will have leverage on. So today we are talking about carcinogenic agricultural produce leaving us, and we are not also examining what are the impact of the fertilizer on it. Because if this thing had to be exported, somebody had to do the due diligence to know the kind of fertilizer the soil require to help the product, so that at the end of the day they become edible, and then of course we can get value from it from the outside. All this comprehensive thing the state needs to do, we need to have those structure on the ground before we say, okay, this is the position we are driving and this is what we want to achieve. But I have seen several initiatives, and we are not short at this. Federal government, state governments have invested heavily in agriculture, and yet we are yet to get the real value that should come from it. And I feel that we need to be a little more strategic in our thinking to see where we want to have an advantage, and also look at what processes we need to put in place for this to happen.